This show is sponsored by you. This is Cup of Go for March 8, 2024. Keep up to date with the important happenings in the Go community in 15 minutes per week. I'm Adelina.
And I'm Jonathan. Good morning, Adelina.
And this is Cup of Go.
It is. Yay. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be back.
Shai came down with a head cold or something this morning, so unfortunately he's not here. But the timing couldn't have been better, I guess, if it's going to happen, to have a woman co-host on International Women's Day, which we'll be talking about pretty soon. So I know you're excited to talk about that.
It was Happy International Women's Day to everyone.
Before we talk about that, let's get out of the way the two topics we promised to talk about on the last episode, which were the new releases that just came out. So we pre-announced last week, or we reported a pre-announcement last week of Go 122.1 and 121.8, which are now out. These are mostly security fixes. Some of them are kind of important. Crypto stuff, Crypto X509, certificate verification stuff can break. The stuff that's most likely to matter to most of you are HTTP related things. It's possible to exhaust your memory with a maliciously formed multi-part request. There's some bugs in the way cookies are handled. It can do some insecure forwarding of cookie headers. And HTML template, the usual suspects as always, crypto, HTTP, and HTML template. HTML template does some incorrect escaping of JSON in some cases. And I can't forget, there's something in net mail. Comments in display names are incorrectly handled. I don't know how serious of a security vulnerability that is, but it is something. TLDR, upgrade, and do it soon if you don't like DOS attacks.
Yeah, definitely the net HTTP fixes caught my eye because I think a lot of people will be handling huge payloads that they don't fully control. So I think that'll be very useful to make sure you don't end up in a memory leak situation.
Exactly. Yeah. And closely related, there was a security update to the protobuf family of packages, which solves a problem with unmarshalling, getting stuck in an infinite loop on some invalid inputs. So if you use protobuf, update the protobuf packages as well. That means protobuf, gRPC, or any of those family of things that use protobuf under the hood, update those. That's the dry, boring news. Update your stuff. Doesn't really need to be said that often. You should update your stuff.
I feel like golfers are pretty good with updating.
I hope so, yeah.
As opposed to because as I've said before, I come from Java. I just know that there is someone out there still running, I don't know what version of Java.
I have a client still using Node 8.
Oh.
And they can't update because of backward compatibility problems. That's a problem you don't have with Go. If you jump into a client, they're still using Go 1.2, you could probably update fairly easily. There'll be a few things, you have to add modules and stuff like that. But for the most part, the language is going to be backward compatible. So that's really nice. Let's talk about International Women's Day, though.
Oh, my favorite topic. No, I'm just joking. It is today, my favorite topic. So yeah, International Women's Day, March 8th. And are you wondering maybe when we started celebrating it?
Yeah, tell me about this history. I mean, women have been around for a really long time. And nations have been around for a long time. So you would expect...
You won't be surprised when I tell you that it started as a movement from the labor parties around the world. And the first time it was celebrated was in 1909. And it was actually in New York. So they're the first ones that celebrated it. And then it caught on over in Europe, who were obviously also having a huge labor movement throughout the continent. What I think is also quite interesting is that the UN marks every year with a different initiative towards helping gender equality. And this year, their campaign is called Invest in Her. And it's all about helping women and other marginalized people achieve gender equality through public funding and public policy. And you can read more about what the UN is saying that we need huge discrepancies in wealth, as we know, especially because women work in the care industries. So yeah, that's all I've got for you for International Women's Day. One other thing I would mention is that in tech in general, throughout March, we share our stories in one way or another. And I really love the Dev.2, also known as the Practical Dev campaign, which has this year been called We Coded. So we're going to provide a link to that so you can check it out. On the Practical Dev.2, there's a special tag called We Coded, so you can read what other people have contributed. And this runs throughout the month. And it's all about people sharing their stories, recommendations, what they think needs changing. And I think it's really lovely when you look back at the collection of material that people write around this time, mostly around women sharing their stories.
Cool.
So have a look at these things.
Now, on a related note, you are heavily involved in Women Who Go also, right?
Yeah. So Women Who Go is all about giving women like gophers, the women that write Go, giving them a space to discuss and to speak, and for us to put forward women role models. What's really interesting is that, sorry if I'm taking up too much time, one of the things that I'm really passionate about when we go to events, because we have in-person events in London, is that everyone asks questions, because a lot of the time we want to be invisible. We don't want to say, I don't understand something. So I always take time and I ask questions and the speakers feel engaged. And I always want to foster this kind of discussion. So it feels a bit strange, like I'm forcing it in the beginning, but people get really into it.
Awesome.
So yeah, that would be my other thing.
Let's talk about meetups. I want to mention one for Shai. Well, he's not here. Do you have any meetups in your area coming up, either for Women Who Go or Go in general?
Yeah, so I live in London, so I'm very UK oriented, and London Gophers meets this month on the 20th of March, and we can leave a link on where to register on Meetup. And I also wanted to mention that the call for papers for GopherCon UK is open. It opened on March 1st and will close on the 17th of May. But get your papers in early. So GopherCon UK is a lovely conference. About 500 gophers gather, and it's in central London. I really like the event, as you can tell. And it's happening from August 14th to August 16th this year. It's always in August. So going forward, cancel all August holidays. You gotta be ready.
Does anybody ever have an August holiday? Like that's the most boring month when it comes to holidays usually.
I think it is the most popular month to take holidays.
On the meetup front, Shai's not here today, but the Israel Go meetup is happening this coming week on Tuesday. So if you're in the Tel Aviv area and want to go meet Shai, wish him a happy recovery. Hopefully he's recovered by then. Don't miss that event. And I'm sure we'll hear from Shai next week how it went. Let's talk about, I was going to say some proposals, but really just one I want to talk about. Well, it's actually a group of proposals, so I guess technically it's some. But we just saw the news, and actually we're going to talk about this in the interview that's coming up. Sorry, Adelina, you weren't in that interview, but Shai and I had an interview with Filippo Valsorda, who does a lot of crypto work on the Go project as a freelancer. And he mentions in the interview that they're trying to move a lot of the X crypto packages into the standard library. Well, that has officially been accepted now. It wasn't at the time of recording, but now it has been. So there's a whole bunch of the crypto packages that are previously under Golang. I think it's golang.org/x/crypto. I don't know that they're all being moved, but a large number of them are being moved into the standard library. So I think that's pretty cool. It means that they'll sort of get a little bit more attention. They've already kind of been treated as though they were the standard library anyway, even though they weren't in the standard library. So it's more just a recognition of the current state of affairs rather than a meaningful change. But I still think it's useful and nice to see.
So when is this happening?
So I don't think that has been defined yet. I think I would expect very soon, probably for Go 1.23, because it's mostly just moving things around. As far as I know, there may be some API changes that happen too, but I suspect that anything that has any major API changes will be delayed. So anything that's more or less ready to copy and paste to the standard library probably will happen fairly quickly. And I would expect to see a large number of new crypto packages in the standard library for 123.
Can I ask a silly question?
Of course. There are no silly questions.
So let's say that I've got code that's importing X crypto.
Mm-hmm.
And now they've moved it to the new place.
Mm-hmm.
What happens then? Do I have to update my code if I update Go, or how does that work?
I was wondering the same thing, actually. My guess, based on how they've handled other X packages that moved, and the big one I'm thinking of is when it was XNet context, and then I think it was Go 1.7, it just became context. You had to change the import path. But the API was more or less the same, so it was just updated the import path. I would expect the same to happen here. It's possible that they could put stubs in place. Go added the alias type long ago. So you could, in theory, move everything to the standard library and then have the X packages reference the standard library in a backward compatible way. So either one would kind of do the same thing. But I haven't seen them do that in the standard library. I think that's mostly used for internal projects. So I would expect you'll have to update your import path to take advantage of that.
Wonderful. Well, it's my favorite way to produce random numbers.
Yes. Well, so you can use, I learned actually in the interview that we'll be listening to here in a few minutes, I learned that the new MathRand is actually much more secure than the old MathRand. So if you're lazy, like I pretend to be sometimes, and just use MathRand, if you use MathRand v2, you probably get basically crypto quality random numbers anyway, without even trying. But you should still use crypto Rand instead.
Well, I'm sure they've done improvements, but when we, I don't know, a couple of years ago, everyone was always screaming at you, no, don't use MathRand.
The old MathRand was very insecure by default, I think, because it didn't seed the random number generator, if I recall.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit. We have a couple of articles that have been running around on the interwebs. One of them made Hacker News, has the delightful title of Go Enums Suck. This comes for you.
And the subtitle is, not the subtitle, what's it called? Like the under.
Yeah, subtitle's fair, I think, yeah.
Yeah. And the subtitle is, let's make them suck less.
Yes. So this article was brought to my attention actually by one of my mentoring students. I'm mentoring with his Go. He's learning Go, and I'm helping him learn that. And he was getting ready to implement an enum or something similar in some of his code, and was asking, should I do it this way? Have you read the article, Adelina?
I skimmed it just now.
Yeah.
It definitely is one of the things I struggled a lot with when I was starting out with Go as well.
Yeah, that's something I struggled with too, and a lot of people do. This gets a lot of attention. There have been various proposals to try to solve this problem. I imagine one day we'll have a proposal that gets accepted. But I mean, if you're not familiar, if you're new to Go or you haven't experienced this yet, the TLDR is Go doesn't actually have enums. It gives you the ability to create constants, and they can be sort of like numerically ordered. But then what if you need a string representation of that? And what if you need to map from the string to the number and the number to the string? Then you have like two different maps plus your list of not enums, of constant numbers. It's kind of a mess. And then you end up creating helper functions. And so that's what this article does. It kind of walks you through, like, here's what Go gives you. And here's the problems it doesn't solve. And then like that keeps building up, and you end up like 3 or 4 levels of problems. And then what if you need to marshal and unmarshal that to JSON or protobuf or whatever? All these different things come up. And then his conclusion is a small library he wrote to try to make some of this easier for you. Have you ever had to do some of this yourself when you have a list of 20 things? And
yeah, especially with like databases, right? So like the database might like return status 0, and you got to map it to not found. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever string you need. The thing that really upsets me fundamentally about enums is like, so for example, in Steven's example, he uses the type operation, which has an underlying type of int, right? There's nothing really, even though you declare these constants and you take an operation as a parameter, there's nothing really for stopping someone to make an operation that is like actually not one of the supported constants. So I can cast like a whole other int, and then pass that, and then it compiles. And another gripe that I have with enums is that I didn't know this. Perhaps everyone around me is a genius and they did know, but they are dynamically allocated in the const block.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone comes and inserts like 2 more lines further up, then the values change. Yes, they are dynamic values, but I think this is a very unintuitive way to like allocate the cost block and what then happens.
Yeah.
So those are my 2 problems that I have.
And that last one is the reason I have come to decide that I hate iota, and I wish it wasn't a feature in the language. I would just rather, I mean, I honestly don't know why it exists, because Go is has such a ideology against magic, and yet there's this magic iota, and it only has one very specific use case, and it's easy to do it wrong.
And you only see when you click on the documentation for iota is like super long, like the comments, and then only somewhere written in is the dynamic allocation that we were talking about. Yeah. And then the mapping back and forth is so brittle, right? Like if you have to maintain 2 maps, and then if you do pass an unknown value, you again have to like wrap the whole thing with another function that checks whether that value is found. So yeah, it is quite messy.
So the 2 maps I sometimes solve by creating one map and then having an init function that generates the second map. But that's also really ugly, because I have to use an init function and increases startup costs, and there's not a good answer to any of this, really. So it's hard to criticize his library, because although it doesn't make all the choices I would make, none of the choices I would make are necessarily correct all the time either. So that's please, Go team, let's have some enum types added in the future, please. We really would. The entire community would thank you.
Yeah, definitely, and especially the newbies, because newbie Adelina was confused.
Definitely. Well, thanks, Stephen, for the article about that. Let's talk about another one here. This isn't really an article. It's a discussion on Reddit. And it has another amazing title. Why does Go have so many traps? And so the poster asks, he's actually reading a book, 100 Go Mistakes and How to Avoid Them, which we've talked about on the show in the past. And he's just surprised at going through this book at all these little, as he calls them, traps that you can run into in the Go language. And why does Go have so many? What do you think, Adelina?
I think just fundamentally because there's not really anyone that starts learning it. And I've spoken about this before. We all come from another language, and we come with our other language opinions. Mm-hmm. And then Go just like maybe just can't do that. But I think the linter has gotten better, and I think the tools have gotten better, and it's like helped, Go Please has gotten better with like figuring out like how to guide people. One of the things that I've done a lot in the past before the linter flagged it is if you're going a for loop that uses an index and then you run that in parallel inside the for loop, then the index is the last value because of the parallelization happening underneath. You know what I'm talking about? The shadowing. And now the linter tells you like, hey, remember to use a variable that like that saves the value of the index inside your Go routine or whatever you're running. And I've done that. I know for sure I've done that a bunch of times in the past, didn't know, and probably left some bugs with Adelina on it, in whatever code base I would have written.
Mm-hmm. So the good news on that point is that particular foot gun is essentially solved in Go 122. Although you reminded me of another article. I wasn't going to mention this on the show today, but I will now. It was shared in our Cup of Go channel on Slack. It's an article called For Loop Semantic Changes in Go 1.22. Be aware of the impact. And it talks about this change and how there are some cases, although I don't think they're common cases. I think the article overstates the cases where it has some surprising impact. So let's talk about that in just a moment. Let's finish the discussion on Go foot guns and traps. Then we'll talk about that article briefly before we close out the show. So the author of the book actually chimed in. He has the top voted response on Reddit. And his response is that many of the sections aren't traps per se, but mistakes we could make. So he makes a distinction between traps and just like garden variety mistakes, I guess. Some of the things are you're not going to hurt yourself if you do it the quote wrong way. You just might not have the greatest performance or whatever. So not everything, there's not 100 traps to avoid in Go. It's 100 mistakes, right? I would add to it that, very similar to what you said, Adelina, I think I think most languages have traps. The second most voted comment says, I guess you haven't ever used JavaScript. 80% of that language is traps.
So I was going to say 3 equal signs.
Yeah. I don't know if it's 100% fair to, if the question is 100% fair, like why does Go have so many traps? Okay, maybe it does in an objective sense, but it may have more or less than other languages. Unless we're comparing it to something else, it's really hard to say if it's better or worse. In my experience, it has fewer traps. There are still some. IOTA, as we just talked about, is one that I wish wasn't there. But it's a good discussion, and it's surprisingly not toxic, at least the parts I've read. For Reddit, it's pretty civil conversation. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes.
But definitely, I just want to give a shout out to the Go team, because I stand by my point that a lot of the Go tooling has gotten better, and, you know, it helps. It does guide you a lot in like what code isn't working and how to write it.
Absolutely. So let's talk briefly about this article I just mentioned, for loop semantic changes in Go 122. Be aware of the impact. This comes to you from go101.org. I don't know the author's name, but go101.org. Thanks for sharing this. It starts, the first half of the article is a summary of problem and the change in 122 to solve the problem, which we just talked about, and we talked about at length on the show before. But then it actually pointed out something I hadn't thought about. There are some places where the new syntax could be surprising. And so I'll just walk through one example. Let's suppose you have for n : equals 0 and then some condition. And then let's say that you call a function within that for loop, just as you were talking about, and you pass, and in that closure, you access n, the thing that is incrementing the for loop. That n value is reset every time the for loop is executed, which might seem obvious because that's the whole point, right? But in that particular syntax, the for n : equals 0, semicolon, the other things, it kind of looks like you're setting n once, and then you update it through the thing, but you don't. You're actually resetting that value every time the loop goes through, and that can have some surprising impacts depending on how you use that value. And that's the point of the article. Now, I've never actually written a for loop that used that, and the examples he uses look contrived to me, so I don't think this is as serious of a problem as the article makes out, but it might be for someone. I'm really curious if somebody, go read the article if you're listening, and if you agree with the author that this is a problem, come share it on the Cup of Go channel on Slack. I'd love to hear from you. Russ Cox didn't think it was a serious problem. I mean, and he did some serious investigation into Go code in the wild and didn't find this to be a problem. But it is a little bit surprising at the very least.
I'm just excited about having shorter loops, to be honest.
Yes.
But I do think it's always important to know the edge cases.
Indeed.
And while I do agree with you that some of the examples are a bit complex, I'm sure that, you know, as Go grows, it's going to be, maybe it'll happen.
It could happen.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Adelina, thanks for joining today. It's been a pleasure to see your smiling face again.
As always, thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Sorry our listeners can't see her smiling face. You'll just have to listen to the smile in her voice. Stick around till after the ad break when we have an interview with Filippo Valsorda, and you'll hear Shai's lovely voice again as we talk about open source contribution and security on the Go project.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're a new listener, thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love to have a rating and or review from you on Spotify, on iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Share it with a friend, share it with a colleague, share it on your work Slack or your Teams. Do Gophers use Teams? I suppose someone does. Someone's forced to. Wherever you chat with your colleagues, share it. And come talk to us. We'd love to get your feedback directly as well. You can talk to us on Slack. We're on the Gopher Slack in the Cup of Go channel. That's cup-o-go, kebab case. We haven't convinced anybody to do camel case yet, so we're still doing kebab case. We have, how many? We have 333 people on the channel now. So it's a popular place to be, and share your news articles there. Some of the stuff we talked about in today's show, I learned about on the channel. So come share your Go news. What else can I say? You can support us as a Patreon member if you're not already. We will do a shout out. We'll shout your name out on the show. I'm not doing that today because I don't know who's joined us because Shai is the keeper of our Patreon and he's not here today. So next week we'll have a backlog of new Patreon members Go to cupago.dev. That's our website. You can find all back episodes. You can become a Patreon member there, and you can buy swag. You can buy a cup like the one I'm drinking my coffee out of right now that has Brewster, our little logo. You can buy a T-shirt. You could be the first one to buy the overpriced wireless phone charger that has Brewster on it. I don't remember how much it costs, $300 or $80 or something. It's way overpriced. But if you the first one to do that, we'll shout your name out on the show as well.
The gopher with the coffee cup is super cute. So definitely check it out.
The stickers, I took 150 stickers to FOSDEM and they were sold out in about 10 minutes. It was really popular. I don't know if anybody listens to the show, but they liked the logo anyway. So anyway, thanks, Adelina, for coming on today. Thanks for stepping in.
Thank you for having me, and have a lovely, lovely day. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Absolutely. Stick around for the interview with Filippo.
So, Jonathan, what's your password?
ABC123.
I'm sorry, that does not include a special character.
Sometimes I add an exclamation point at the end.
Oh, you got it. So I want to recommend something called Password Game. It's in a site called Neil.fun, which we need more sites like that anyway. But if you want to spend like 2 hours and get really, really frustrated, but be super proud at the end, you should try Password Game. It's like a lot of rules trying to, you start typing the password and it's like, include an uppercase letter, include a special character. The digits in your password must add up to 25. And it gets progressively worse from there. Must include a month of the year. So you like write May, and then you have to include a sponsor. So you write Pepsi. And then the Roman numerals in your password must multiply to 35. So you lowercase the M in May because M is 500. You're like, okay, XXXV. You're like, good. And then you need to fill in a captcha, and then you need the Wordle answer. And it gets worse and worse. It's a really fun game. Like, I don't think it's really the way to do cryptography right. You know what I mean? It's just too difficult.
I don't know. Cryptography is confusing. I just do whatever's easy. I usually use MathRand.
Nah.
Well, we got him. Hey, Filippo, why don't you tell us why that's bad?
Well, here's the thing. I know that people like you do that. So in Go 122, the last one.
Yeah.
Oh, but it's always hard because we're always thinking about the next release, and then the one that got released, everybody gets excited about the one that we stopped working on like a month ago, and it's always a bit confusing. Anyway, Go 122 actually switches the default of MathRand, the new MathRand v2 package, to a cryptographically secure random number generator. Now, does that mean you should go and use MathRand for security relevant things? No, please don't. Also, because if you still do the new source method, that one has to stay the same for compatibility reasons. So that one's still not secure. But at least when people just use the functions from the top level of the package, most of the times we're going to save them from shooting their own foot.
Very
So
nice.
sounds like you know a lot about Go and cryptography. Who are you, Filippo? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Filippo Valsorda. I've been maintaining the Go cryptography standard library since 2018. I've done that first at Google as the lead of the Go security team. And these days I'm doing it as an independent open source maintainer. We can talk about what that means a bit more later if you want.
Mm-hmm. I hope we do get the chance to do that.
Yeah, that's sort of the point.
Yeah. So let's start there. So about a year ago, maybe a little more, you announced in a blog post that you were going full-time, sort of independently doing open source software. Just briefly, how has that year been for you?
It's gone pretty well. If we had done this a year ago, I would have told you about all the things that I want from that and why I think it would work. But really, a year ago, it was an experiment, and I was very much making it up as I was going. And, if the clients that signed at that time are listening, thank you for your vote of confidence. But it's going well now. I have a fairly stable client park. There's enough clients that my compensation is comparable with the one I had at Google. And I don't say that for bragging or because the most important part is compensation, but because I think that's one of the core parts of making what I'm doing sustainable as a real option for open source maintainers.
Absolutely, yeah.
The whole point of doing what I did was not that I couldn't find another way to be a maintainer on the Go project, because I was working at Google on the team, and they were going to keep paying me to do that for Google. But I wanted to test out if it was actually possible to find a model for funding open source maintainers of critical projects like Go, which does not rely neither on voluntarism or on people taking giant pay cuts and doing it out of the goodness of their heart. And at the same time, doesn't have the problem of scale. Like Google did fantastic work for Go and for the Go ecosystem. Go simply wouldn't exist without Google funding the team and incubating it. Fundamentally, as Go grows more and more and more, the value of Go to Google doesn't grow as much, right? And that's not a Google-specific thing. That's not a Go-specific thing. I've heard the same story from dozens of different open source projects at many different companies. I've heard it from teams at Microsoft. I've heard it from teams at AWS, at VMware, everywhere. Fundamentally, as the project grows, the amount of effort required to maintain it grows because there's more players that are using it in more different ways, and more issues, more contributions, more everything. But there is no good reason for the single company that maintains the whole project to keep adding headcount and headcount and headcount to a team, right? Because whatever value that company is getting from that project is not directly tied to how many other companies use it in the broader ecosystem. So that's fundamentally a sustainability issue. And I know that now open source sustainability is kind of all the rage. You hear the White House talking about it, which, gotta say, it's kind of weird. It just confuses me. It used to be my hobby horse, and now everybody's talking about open source sustainability. But when I started talking about this, which is now a year and a half ago, a couple of years ago, it was, I wanted to experiment with a way to show that it was possible to do differently. And everybody said, oh, there's just no way. It's a tragedy of the commons thing. Companies just don't want to pay for what they can get for free. And I was like, I don't think that's true. I think that if you get a PDF in front of them with worded the right way, and you set up a US bank account and you send invoices and accept checks and all the stuff necessary to read as a professional to the companies. So not, send a link to your GitHub sponsors, which companies' receivables department has no idea what to do with. And instead just talk about, this is business risk, and you can reduce your business risk by funding this, and it's a retainer contract, and it's billed monthly, and you get to talk to me as an advisor and a liaison for the project. I was saying, I think it would work, and I think it would scale better, because the more companies use the project, the more the project is successful, the more potential clients there are, so the more money you can make, the more maintainers you can hire. And everybody was like, no, we've tried. There's just no way to get money out of these damn companies. I was like, have you tried though?
Talking to them.
Not just talking to them, but like presenting as a professional. And I understand it's annoying. Like, it's not like I enjoy doing sales. But I've never met a dentist who says, I really like teeth, but this whole thing about setting up a practice and billing clients, I want none of that. If they pay me, great. Otherwise, it means they just want to keep their teeth falling off. And I'm like,
open source dentistry.
Yes. Yeah. I want open source maintainer to be just as boring a profession as dentist, a thing that you can start and do and be a independent dentist, or you can be with a larger firm, or you can join a small practice and as a junior and then grow into, a profession.
Mm-hmm. So there's a question here. You mentioned, you get the PDF in front of them, and the value you offer them is lowered business risk, or meetings and expertise. These are good, valuable things, but they are not the usual deliverables you hear from freelancers. Like, oh, I'm going to do this project for you, or you're going to get X hours a month from me,
Correct.
Which is very different. So How do you, when you come to a company that's like trying to pigeonhole you into, okay, he's a Go freelancer, and you say, no, I'm not a Go freelancer. I'm not going to give you 8 hours a month or, this project done by like April. How does that conversation go?
So that's very important because that's another non-scalable model. If the maintainer has to keep selling hours like a freelancer, at some point the maintainer is not doing any work on the project anymore. And if they have to keep adding features, then they have more maintenance work, not less at the end of it. And that, again, doesn't scale. So how that conversation goes is that I never say the word freelancer. Not once in the conversation. I present myself as, depending on what the company, where the company takes it, we talk about in terms of a consultant or in terms of advisor. That's the closest thing. And companies understand advisors, especially the smaller ones, and companies understand consultants, especially the larger ones. And they do engage consultants for things, for areas where they have critical dependency. For example, if they know that they are going to have to interact with a certain municipality to get some permits, they know that they're interacting with an institution and they want consultants who know how to interact with that institution. And so when they are big enough that they have things that they would like fixed upstream or that they would like to contribute upstream, they do understand the value of somebody who can interact with that institution, in this case, the project, and help as a liaison to do that. I want to be clear, I don't sell them on governance. I don't tell them, oh, you pay me and I'm going to go in there and merge your stuff and fix your issues. First, because I don't have the authority to do that. I am not the Go team, right? And second, because that's a poor incentive alignment for open source projects. Open source project is a multi-stakeholder deal where there are many players, and especially cryptography. Half of my job, more than half of my job, is saying no, because if we do add that feature, it will make it harder to maintain the libraries, and then there will be bugs, and those bugs will be security issues, and those security issues will cost everybody else much more than they benefited the one little, user who needed a weird special mode for something. So I don't sell them on governance, but I do explain that if you don't have the expertise in-house, it's actually kind of hard to make sure that you present your issue well, or that you present a proposal structured like it should be structured, address it to the right group. For example, many projects prefer a PR, right? They say some projects even have this practice that I honestly really don't like, which is they close your issue and say, oh, we would take a PR for that, but we're not going to implement it ourselves. And issue trackers are not to-do lists. You don't need to close a ticket and cause duplicates. Anyway, each project does whatever works best for them. But Go, in Go, if you open a CL and you don't open an issue, we're not going to notice it. We are extremely issue-driven, and we would map, at least on the cryptography packages, but I feel like that's true of most of Go. We'd rather do the implementation ourselves. We know the style. Coding is not the hard part. The hard part is collecting requirements, figuring out what should be done, deciding the API, all of that stuff. You can push a lot forward the process of a contribution to Go by doing that work in an issue, while doing the implementation might even slow it down, because the review cycles might be slower than somebody on the team just picking it up after all of the investigation has been done and all decisions have been taken, and just implementing it, getting it reviewed by the other maintainer and pushing it through. But, this is the sort of thing clients pay for. When they have an issue, I help them figure out where the issue fits and why, what they can do about it, if they can fix it outside of the standard library, if it makes sense to bring it upstream, how to bring it upstream, and I help them structure the issue correctly, etc.
So I think we have a bias here because both Jonathan and I are also freelancers. I do a bit of freelancing on the side. Jonathan is a full. I don't know if even that's fair to say, right, Jonathan? You're a full-time freelancer?
Yeah, I would say so.
We can talk about the business side of how to become an open source maintainer for a pretty long time. I have one question that's interesting to me. You talk about it like you want to make this model sustainable, not just for you, like as a career path. Do you know of anyone other than yourself who managed to set up a business or go down this path like yourself?
Yes. So indeed, I'm not doing this because I wanted to set up a business for myself. The entire point is to clear a path and show a way to go about it. However, the first step was showing it works myself. So the first year or so of it has been focused on that. I've started focusing on expanding to other people just recently. And the first way to expand to other people is, vertically. I've hired another maintainer, which is Nicola Murino. He's the maintainer of SFTP Go. And Xcrypto SSH, the standard library, the SSH package. Well, not quite standard library, but here's a scoop. We're probably moving all of Golang org Xcrypto into the standard library, at least the non-deprecated parts, because we've always treated it as the same thing. So might as well have them in the same place.
Fair enough.
Anyway, the SSH package was a very important package. So many DevOps companies were using it, but it was completely unmaintained. Everybody had their forks, and that was costing companies even more than what it would cost to fund us, right? So I went to Nicole and told him, hey, I want to pay you to maintain the SSH package. And he's now doing that part-time, and the SSH package is doing so much better thanks to him. And then I turned around and I went to my clients and said, hey, I know you use a lot of SSH. To prospective clients. And wouldn't you want both me and the maintainer of the SSH package to hang out in a Slack channel with you? Great. So, first expansion was hiring people. I might be getting someone to help with the HTML template package. We'll see. Next step, though, is getting other maintainers to go and do the same thing. And I'm starting to set up a bit of a community to exchange notes and share things like contract language and experiences on what works and what doesn't. So if anybody listening wants to try to strike out on their own and do this is a very good time to email me. My email is super easy to find around.
As we usually do on the show, your contact information will be in the show notes. So if you're listening, you're like, damn, I really want to work on my open source thing full time, and I want to figure out how to do it and get companies that use it to pay me. You can find Filippo's email in the show notes.
I want to caveat that with two things. First, I think my model works for projects that are critical to at least some companies. I think that's a broader definition than one could think of right away, because it just needs to be critical to some companies. And critical doesn't mean, it's the one thing they built their entire business on. Right. How I communicate to my clients whether something is critical or not, I tell them, okay, think about how much it would cost you to replace this if it went unmaintained, or maintain it yourself if it went unmaintained. If the answer is like a couple weeks, 3 weeks, you have my email. If you need anything, feel free to email, but I don't think this is a good fit. I'm not going to sell you anything. If the answer is engineer years, well, I'm cheaper. So that if there are some companies to whom you can make this argument, I think that's the first test. The second one is that for now, it's still a bit of a hard sell. So you need a bit of a network, a bit of a personal brand, a way to get in the door. How I get in the door is usually that engineers at companies have worked with me or interacted with me or heard about me or watched my talks or listened to podcasts. And I talk to the engineers first and they tell me, hey, I can't help you. I don't make decisions here. And I tell them, yes, but you can make an email intro and explain a bit what is Go, why is it important to the decision makers, and I'll take it from there. I'm hoping that becomes less and less the case. The more we produce resources and buy mindshare for the model, and the more companies have been exposed to this, I'm hoping that over time, companies will even be proactive in wanting this. They will look at their dependencies and say, well, we have 5 critical dependencies, and for 3 of them, we have some kind of retainer or support contract or something that gives us that kind of advice and stability and business risk mitigation. And for these 2, we don't. Let's go out there and find people who can help us with that. But that's, down the road. For now, if you want to do this right now, you have to be willing to take some risk and to pull out the Rolodex, right? The contact cards and go through them and make some calls. If that sounds like you, though, yes.
One last question on the business and pricing side. Just to make it clear for our listeners, how does your contract with your clients work? They pay you a fixed monthly fee for access to you. How does that work, broadly speaking?
Yeah, that's it. It's a fixed monthly fee. I structured it at 3 tiers. And I'm starting to think that's just broken because everybody just takes the top tier.
Okay.
Which, hey, good.
Yeah.
I don't know if the lower tiers are necessary to selling the higher tiers, but I don't think that's it. It's more that when you do enterprise sales, companies don't really care about the difference between numbers in the same rough order of magnitude. The hard parts are other things like legal and...
You need to get past the security. Once you're in, you're in. Doesn't matter if it's 100 or 150.
Correct, precisely. So basically, they all cluster at that top tier, except basically one client, and
they get code written in Python. Like
they use MathRand.
Yeah, they get the cheaper randomness generators. Filippo has some cables connected to a banana at the back of the room.
If that client's listening, this is all a joke. Obviously, we know that he's not compromising your security.
The main difference is that that client doesn't have a shared Slack channel, which is the useful thing, like the thing that is came out as most useful to keep contact.
You mentioned that the contracts have to be scalable. Hours don't work, but what I'm understanding is if you work on a project and multiple companies use that project and they pay you to maintain it, basically each of them pays for mindshare. Just some of them share that mindshare and they don't know about it. And that is more scalable than selling, hours to each company to basically fix the same thing 5 times.
Exactly.
But they do get your attention. Even if it's shared, they get the value of your attention. So that's more scalable.
Yeah. So a friend once looked at me after I explained what I was doing and like, this friend tends to stare into the distance for a sec and then think about it and said, huh, neat. You invented double billing, but for open source. Great. And honestly, yeah, but the clients know this. Clients, have the client, like the client list is public, actually. You can go to github.com/philosotil and the list of clients is right there because part of what they get is marketing, right? They get to put some text at the end of my newsletter and so on and so forth. So they know that I'm not, focusing on their thing exclusively, but that's actually in their interest. Because if I start just working on client issues and stop working on the upstream project, that's exactly what they don't want. Right. They want me to keep doing that and they want me to stay an expert and stay on the ball so that when things are coming up upstream that I know a client will care about, I can tell them and get their feedback from them. And so that when they have a problem, I can answer it authoritatively because I've been working on the upstream thing. If at some point I just devolve into this client-facing account manager that only focuses on client issues, that's actually a failure scenario for the clients because they don't get what they need anymore, which is a direct line with a maintainer who is spending most of his time on the project. Mm-hmm. So most of my time is spent on maintenance. Most of my time is spent exactly like I was spending it when Google was the only company paying me. And then there's a bit of time that at Google I spent on performance reviews that here instead I spend on sales and on answering questions on Slack when they come up and reaching out to clients when I know it's relevant to them. But here's the thing, that's useful to me even. When I'm working on a new feature, I want to talk to companies that would use it, even if they weren't paying me. It's just that it's kind of hard to reach your users sometime in advance. Instead, your users usually upgrade 3 months after the release, find out that the thing doesn't work for them, and now you're talking to them.
Yeah. In angry tones.
Exactly. And that's 9 months too late. And that sucks for me, and that sucks for them. Can I say sucks?
Yeah. Don't worry.
Yeah.
And instead, if I had a direct channel to them, we spoke about it in advance. They told me what I needed to know. The result is better. Everybody's happy.
And if they're like financially tied to that issue, you'll get much clearer communication ahead of time because they have like vested interest or even, it's a sunk cost fallacy. We paid Filippo for like this month maintenance. He better put out a really good issue. In some weird way, you didn't only invent like double billing. You also invented like blackmailing them into giving you good issue descriptions.
Yes, I mean,
again,
no, but
this is a joke. Filippo's business is super. I don't know why we're trying to
Completely
present
above
it
the
as
board.
like very.
He doesn't really work for the open source mafia.
Yeah. Open source mafia. That could be a good name for your community, for the Slack channel of all the professionals. Okay. So other than the business part, the main parts of Go you maintain are not about HTTP servers or compilers. They are about cryptography, which is a topic most developers, are aware of. Maybe they'll learn some basic cryptography concepts in their degree. But the main advice most, like 95% of developers would probably say is good, is don't mess with cryptography yourself. Someone else is doing it for you. Use the libraries that the language provides. And basically these libraries come from you, right? So I want to ask, how did you get into cryptography at first? Like if someone is interested in working on cryptography, how could they do it? And I guess this goes back quite a while, right?
Yeah, it does. By the way, I want to mention when you say this dude, there's me, there's Roland Shoemaker, who works at Google. There's Nicola Murino, who works with me, and
yeah, there are many hacker maintainers that are doing supply chain attacks and weakening all the cryptography in the change list as well. We want to shout them out.
No, it's fine. We just don't review most CLs, so there's no way to sneak anything in. This is actually a bit of a sour joke because there are a bunch of CLs that are waiting, and we are very review constrained. So
you can use this. You can definitely use this platform to push CLs that you want to get reviewed. I can be accused. I used the podcast more than once to get people to look at an issue I wanted. But I do warn you, both issues that I mentioned that way went the other way that I wanted. I wanted YAML in the standard library. It was immediately rejected. And I wanted no white space in HTTP. 2 days after the episode came out, the feature was merged. So it's sort of a monkey's paw podcast. You request something to happen, the opposite happens. All the change lists will get rejected.
No, but here really it's more that listeners might be annoyed at listening to this because they're waiting for me to review their thing. And we are not very good at reviewing that. That's a whole other story. Anyway, your question was how did I get into cryptography? I think in high school, one of those extracurricular things that you can do, like I was doing some that are related to math. I was convinced that I was going to study math in university, and in retrospect, I would have hated that. But anyway, one of those just has this small chapter on cryptography, and I'm like, oh, that's fun. That's a bit more of an engineering-y thing. You put together these things and you make them do interesting stuff. It's very applied, right? And then I took the Coursera course, Cryptography 1 by Dan Bonnet, which is this fantastic course. The joke is that Coursera, the Cryptography 2 course, but then by Dan Bonnet is coming in 3 months, and that has been true for the past 10 years. So don't actually wait for Cryptography 2 to come out, but Cryptography 1 is already an excellent course. And then I stumbled upon these things that at the time were called the Matasano Crypto Challenges. Matasano is now not a thing anymore, got bought. And the things are now called the CryptoPals. And Matasano used to use them for hiring, but now you can just go on cryptopals.com and check them out. And there are these very fun challenges which really hit the spot for what I like, which tell you how to build a broken crypto system. They tell you, oh, implement this and this and this and that, and use that. Here's a couple links. Here's a spec, like implement it like that. And then they tell you, great. If you implement it like that, it's broken. So now attack it. Here's how you attack it. And then you write also the code for the attack. And how it used to run is that you would do 8, I think. And then you would send the solutions, and they would send you back the next 8. And they would start with super simple stuff like base 64 encoding, and at the end like AES. But it was like you can use AES from the library. It's okay. Just encrypt something, so like make the penguin. And then by the time you get to the 6th set, it's like, okay, so here's a paper. That paper broke SSL. when it came out. Now, use the exact same attack against your own broken thing, and now you're implementing papers from, at the time, like the past couple of years, and they escalate like that, and they get more and more into the nitty-gritty. And I had so much fun, and I kept sending them to them. And I had no idea that this was a hiring thing. And then I get to the end, and they're like, great, so. And I'm like, so what? Well, I don't know. When do you want to interview? Oh, I see. So this is a thing you can do professional? Anyway, I didn't actually end up taking the job. They do a lot more penetration. They used to do a lot of more penetration testing than I enjoy. I actually enjoy being, library writing and design making than breaking stuff. But after that, there was the Heartbleed test that was just a stroke of luck, and then started working at Cloudflare, and from there I got involved in internet protocol design, and then after that Google. I was actually about to switch careers after Cloudflare. I was going to become an agent for engineers.
You mean like a recruiter? Or
the recruiter works for the company, right?
Okay. Oh, an agent for the yeah, I understand.
Right.
For the
engineers are paid, US market rate. Now there's a bit of a slump, but still levels.fyi will tell you that engineers will make from 200 to 400K a year. That's a lot of money. Most professionals that make that kind of money in a market where there's a shortage of talent have professional figures that help them negotiate, and so on, right? And engineers, the average engineer is, how do we put this? Not very good at negotiating.
In general, yeah.
So, there's just so much that telling everybody to read Patrick McKenzie can do, which, by the way, will drop in the show notes, because those essays made me so much money. It's ridiculous. But anyway, I was tempted. I was about to start that business, and then Samir, at the head of the Go team, he recently published a few articles talking about his tenure on the Go team. He called me up and was like, "So we are hiring for the open source team, and like people say that you do Go and cryptography, and Adam Langley is kind of busy, so."
So
Nice.
basically, what you're saying is, if your way into cryptography was being interested by challenges like that are akin to a CTF, like there's a thing here, break it, play around with it.
Yep.
Would you recommend anybody to try and get into the field if they haven't already, or is that a field that just calls out to people?
No. So there was both a component of challenges and also a component of actually building stuff, right? Because as I was telling you earlier, I don't enjoy just breaking stuff, just figuring stuff out, but also building a thing so that it's elegant, so that what's very nice of this job? You can be a perfectionist. If on any other job I spent 3 weeks rewriting the same 500 lines multiple times, trying different APIs for those same 500 lines, writing 2,000 lines of tests for those 500 lines, and trying to start a community project to generate better test vectors for those 500 lines, I would get fired. And correctly. And instead, in cryptography, people are just like, "Oh, great! Filippo is producing test vectors for this, and like the implementation is very clean, excellent, right?" So I can justify that. So perfectionism is a thing that you get to just run free with it. But your question was, would I recommend people get into it? And the thing is, yes. And also, I don't think people should feel as scared by the field as they sometimes are. There's always the famous "don't roll your own crypto" thing, and my feelings about it are kind of mixed. We did a whole podcast episode about "don't roll your own crypto" for security cryptography, whatever, with Thomas Ptacek, who was the founder of Matasano, which did the CryptoPulse. And the thing is, it's dangerous because if you get anything wrong, you might not know you did. and then it might endanger users if you deploy it to production. But it's also not rocket science, although better that rocket science is also a thing that you could just, learn and study. And
it's not rocket surgery is what you're saying.
Right. It's a thing you can learn. And if you're curious, you should absolutely just follow that curiosity and not get scared of the aura that's around this field. I think the only point of the aura is to stop the programmer who has no interest in cryptography from saying, oh, I need a thing to encrypt, and Filippo's thing is kind of slow, and the API asks me for random bytes. I think I can make one that's faster and doesn't require random bytes if I just stitch together these things from Stack Overflow. And, maybe there was a reason our thing worked like that, and now your users are at risk.
You just reminded me of the person I worked with in the past who was like, bcrypt is too slow. I'm going to do my own implementation. Like,
right.
Bcrypt is supposed to be slow. That's part of the design.
Yeah, exactly. So it's important that if you're not interested in cryptography, you don't venture into it by mistake. And if you are still learning, you don't present your thing as a thing people should use and rely on. But an alternative to don't roll your own crypto that I like very much is from Deirdre Connolly, one of the hosts of that podcast, who says instead, don't do cryptography alone. Do it with somebody experienced. So you get your stuff reviewed by somebody, or you contributed to a project that has code review. That's sort of how I started. I remember the first CL I sent to the Go project, and was mitigation for the Lucky 13 attack, which was this timing side channel in TLS. And it was particularly fun because Lucky 13, when it came out, it was like, oh no, it's broken, and like everybody scrambled and to fix it in OpenSSL and so on. And then I went into the Go source, and I found a large comment by Adam Langley, written years before Lucky 13 was discovered, that said, this is probably not constant time, but OpenSSL does the same thing, so I guess it's fine. So Adam Langley found Lucky 13 years before.
Wait, so what you're saying is do cryptography alone, because otherwise you copy other people's mistakes.
I mean, actually copying an established library is not obvious that it's good. OpenSSL has more resources now, but for a while it was bad because they didn't have resources at all. And I don't think it would be classy for me to mention specifics, but I do sometimes look at some cryptography toolkits and go like, I guess you could do it like that. So don't always assume that just because something is out there and widely used, it means it's necessarily correct. But if you can find somebody experienced, or a community, or even just a course, it's truly something that you can learn just like everything else.
So it's one thing to learn about it, but one thing about cryptography is that if you go out and learn UX design, and I really appreciate everybody has their job and all the jobs are meaningful and it's all okay. But if you make a mistake in UX design, like the worst example I can think of is that Hawaii missile launch the test where they had the test button and the real button next to each other. Then everybody in Hawaii got a nuclear missile launch alert. Jonathan, you know what I'm talking about? You're like quizzically.
No, I do.
You should find that article. It's really funny. But just everybody got a message on their phone in the like highest level of SMS that you can. Like nuclear missile alert. This is not a drill. Go into shelter. And it was a drill. They just went to test the system. But because of UX design, the buttons were next to each other. The button jumped when the banner loaded and the guy pressed the wrong thing. But, this is like worst case scenario for UX design, or you lose money for your company or whatever. But the mistakes in cryptography, they carry a bit more weight, I think. I would be a lot more nervous knowing that my cryptography code is running, and securing companies' most secret IP, people's privacy, private photos, political groups trying to talk safely to one another in hard situations. Like, this is real stuff. Privacy is very important, I would say.
I have two answers to that. One is that there are safeguards, and there are ways to do your job in a way that minimizes risk. One of them is, again, doing it together. Like, none of my code goes out as is, although, none of my code goes out as is Go itself. My Filippo.io/libraries, it's a little different, so I'm a little more conservative with those, for example, and they go out to fewer users anyway. There's code review. Roland or Sophie or somebody with domain knowledge always reviews my code, so there's that. And part of being a good cryptography engineer and part of what you learn, or at least what I think one should learn to become a cryptography engineer, is how to minimize the risk and to assess the risk of your own implementation. Because the reason I'm confident in my code is not that I think I'm really good and I looked at it very closely. It's that I rewrote it 3 times to be simpler and simpler and simpler, so it's very clear what it does to the reviewers. And if there was something wrong, it would be very clear to the reviewers. It's that I spent more time thinking about how to test it and writing test vectors for it and deploying the test vectors than I spent writing the code itself. So even if I did get some things wrong, they would have been coded by that or that or that test vector. And even I get involved in standardization and specification projects to advocate for designs that are easier for me to implement so that there is less risk and there's not as much chance that something will go wrong. So you can mitigate that risk is one side of the answer. And the other side of the answer is, yeah, it is kind of a high pressure job, but that can be part of what one enjoys about the job, right? I would actually argue that emergency medicine has fewer ways to mitigate the risk of a wrong decision. If I make a wrong decision today in implementing something, hopefully the right decisions I made before and after will catch that bug or will prevent security impact from that bug. I am also training as a EMT, and I'm actually way more worried about split-second decisions I have to make on doing that than with cryptography. So there's a number of jobs that have consequences, and there's high pressure like emergency medicine, and there's large impact. Anything that has political implications like urban zoning. Urban zoning has large impacts on a lot of people and can change their lives, and that can have very severe consequences on those people's lives, and it can affect, depending for at what level you do it, more people than cryptography library could. But
so basically what you're saying is, yeah, everybody's stressed actually.
Yeah, everybody picks the kind of job that matches their risk tolerance and how they work, right? I work well under pressure and less well when needing to systematically do something the same way for a long time, which is why I could, on the medical side, not that I'm trained as a doctor, but I could never be a GP, a general practitioner that follows a number of different patients for a long time and cares for their health long term. I'm much more fit for being a EMT that has to perform well under pressure for those 4 hours and then can just space out and and play video games and forget about laundry for 3 days in a row. And likewise with cryptography, I work better with something that I can, hyper focus for a couple of weeks, get it really well tested and get it into the system. But I'm not a good fit for teams that have like sprints that need to deliver on customer requests, because some weeks I'm just useless. In this job, it's fine because nobody has a clear, precise timeline for when Kyber 768 needs to land in the Go standard library. As long as it's in the next 3 months, it's going to be fine. So it's finding a thing that fits for you. And cryptography is an interesting spot in the spectrum of jobs, but sometimes it's made out to be this thing that just sits on another plane of existence, right? These black magic sorcerers clad in black robes, and not really.
Do you own a black robe?
I mean, that's a personal question.
Okay, fair enough. For the record, he's not wearing it on the call, so if he has one, he's kept it in the closet for now. Well, this has been a very fascinating conversation, very interesting. The business aspect of software is something that fascinates me personally, so I enjoy talking about that. We've been talking for a while. Let's give some links. Where can people find you and read about your crypto because you have a newsletter of your own, what are the best places to go?
So the thing that I would recommend is the newsletter. It's called Cryptography Dispatches, and I try to publish it every 2 weeks and see about what we just talked about. It does not come out every 2 weeks, but I try. And by the way, I always appreciate when people reply to those emails. I fight with the ghost configuration all the time to make sure that the reply to works, and I appreciate when people tell me the things they would want to hear about. It's not really about what's new. It's about cryptography engineering, cryptography design. Sometimes it's about what I just worked on because that's what's top of mind. But it's more of essays than anything else. If you sign up to that, there's two options: that's cryptography dispatches and maintainer dispatches. So basically, if you were only interested in the second half of this podcast, you can untick maintainer dispatches and never hear about the ways I am finding ways to build my clients. And if you don't care about cryptography, but you do want to follow the professional maintainer part, you untick cryptography dispatches and you get the emails about the maintainer model. So that's the two topics are indeed not necessarily overlapping. And then, we are all shit posting somewhere. And my spot these days is Blue Sky because it very much feels like Twitter did back when it was fun. And
as long as it's not change list.
Yep. So Blue Sky has open registrations now, so anybody wants to follow that, I'm easy to find. Name and surname is, as far as I know, globally unique.
Nice. That's not something I can say.
It does mean I have to spell it every time, letter by letter, because nobody ever got the first name correct on the first try outside of Italy. But hey,
for our listeners, that's going to be a problem, right? Because we're going to have the link in the show notes, so they don't have to spell anything, especially since people have told me they usually listen to this while driving. So please don't try to type anything in your phone. But especially not Filippo Valsorda's name, which I'm looking at right now. And I believe that if I close my eyes and open them, I cannot spell it. All right. Well, thanks, Filippo. It was super fun having you. I have to admit that if you found this conversation interesting, you have to go read the blog. There's some super cool stuff there. I read the code book when I was 16, and I enjoyed the challenges in the back where you have to on paper solve some cryptography stuff. But I never got into it proper. But when Heartbleed came out, I was all into it. It was very interesting, stuff like that. And just looking at the articles, post quantum cryptography for the Go ecosystem. I mean, come on, how can you not love this shit? So go check out the blog. I highly recommend it. So anyway, thanks a lot for coming, Filippo.
Absolutely. Thank you folks for having me.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We do have one last question that we ask all of our guests this year. Now you've been doing crypto for a while. I don't know if you started using Go. You started to tell us a story before we recorded. How did you start using Go? And then the real question is, were there any big surprises for you in the process?
So I started using Go back in 2013 when I was doing what's now called the Recurse Center, which, by the way, strongest possible recommendation for the Recurse Center. I'm not going to make an ad out of it, and I'm not affiliated, except the fact that it's a fantastic community I'm part of. But anyway, it's this, let's call it a retreat for programmers to learn about programming, get better as programmers. And the beautiful thing is that you do that with a bunch of people that are there for the same reason. And one of the alumni, Travis, one day comes to after hours, and he tells me, I want to show you a thing. There's this very cool new language. It's called Go, and it compiles to static binaries and use like that. And he shows me Go, and I look at it because Recurse is a lot of this, a lot of people telling you about cool stuff and learning from others. But I'm sort of all right, that's cool, moving on. And I proceed to not care about it for the next 3 months, even more. I was only doing Python at the time and other stuff to think about. Then Heartbleed comes out, and I want to make a test for it. And to make a test for it, I need to modify TLS stack so that it does something different. And really at the time, the main option that meant OpenSSL. And I open OpenSSL and then I close OpenSSL and I'm like, no, no, that's not happening. And I had heard that the Go had its own cryptography stuff that was written better, that was maintained by Adam Langley, that was much shorter, that was simpler to understand. And so I go in there and, 5-6 lines, and I'm adding support for the heartbeat extension, and I get it to turn into a test. By the way, that patch was not written. I was using a global channel, so it would only work for one connection at a time. And then at some point, and I was using a Python server that was just calling the binary for every test, and that was not scaling. So at some point, everything's exploding, everything's growing. So I just add Go routines, this cool concurrency stuff that Go has. You can see where this is going. Anyway, that's the first time Adam Langley ever heard of me, when I reported a bogus vulnerability where I was like, oh, some things are crossing between connections, which clearly is a security issue. And no, that was my path. That was me not understanding concurrency. Anyway, a whole tangent there, sorry. But what did I find surprising of Go? I'm not sure if this is strictly surprising, but I think that was definitely a misconception that I had at the beginning, and that at some point I had a aha moment, was that concurrency is really not, using concurrency is not that big a part of using the language. And when you start with Go, you want to use Go routines everywhere. And by the time you have 5-6 years under the belt, you want to put Go routines as far as possible from wherever you touch them. Like you want to wrap them in error groups, or you want your libraries to expose a synchronous API and then use Go routines in the backend to implement those things asynchronously. And really, the magic of Go is less the fact that it lets you do more concurrency, and more the fact that when you do concurrency, you can't really tell. So using more Go routines kind of breaks that spell. So it's actually going against the grain of the language. The beauty of it is that you don't have to type async. You don't have to type await. You don't have to write an event loop. You write your code as if it was not concurrent code. And then there's the scheduler and in the backend that automatically goes like, oh, you're waiting on a syscall read? Well, I'll block you there, move you off the processor, put another Go routine on the processor, and I'll just deal with that for you. So really, if you manage to use Go without ever noticing the program is concurrent, Go succeeded. And that is having good concurrency support. But when at the beginning you hear good concurrency support, you hear, I need to use the Go keyword all the time. And by the end, you're like, I shall never use the Go keyword.
When I first was introduced to Go, I was all excited about the concurrency, and it's kind of the sexy feature that everybody was talking about. And yeah, I agree. Like it's something I rarely use, or at least rarely use directly. And if you use HTTP server, you're using it, but you don't have to care because it's all buried. It doesn't matter.
Exactly. And, hopefully cryptography is a bit of the same. I like to think that Go has very good cryptography support. But what that means is that you never do cryptography or notice that the cryptography is happening. That cryptography just is a thing that Go solves for you.
And you don't have time to go read about it or wonder in the compilation times. That's one thing too. You don't have to go idly read in the meantime.
All right. Well, Filippo, this has been great. Thank you for coming on and talking with us for about an hour.
Thank you, folks.
Anything that we forgot to ask you about? Anything important you want to say before we sign off?
I think we covered both the business side and some technical fun stuff. So yeah,
wonderful.
I got to pitch the newsletter. Thank you for that.
You did. I just signed up. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks a lot, Filippo.
Thank you. Have a good day.